Okay, so let's look at the main reasons why people went on the First Crusade and have a couple of examples, kind of pro and against each one. So the first one look at is religion. This is obviously it seems probably being the most important reason as to why people went. And we have lots of evidence of religion being the main motive. For example, you can use in essays, all four versions of Pope Urban's speech talk about reaching Jerusalem. They all talk about attacking the Islamic world who are dominating that area. They all talk about the promise which Pope Urban makes, which is to have eternal reward in heaven for going on this crusade. The fact it is actually a pilgrimage and people take the cross as pilgrims would do all suggests, that religion was crucial. And we can be a bit cynical these days and say, well, the perhaps we're just using religion as their excuse. But there was a genuine interest in religion. Religion was really kind of soaked in medieval culture. If you want a few specific examples, obviously in essays you can mention the Pope's speeches and mention what he promises them. There are some specifics you can mention as well. So Godfrey of Bouillon, who we mentioned previously, he sold and mortgaged his lands which he had to the bishops of Verdun and Liège. And one document says, again this is in the Ashbridge book, says that he was seized by the hope of an eternal inheritance. That's a contemporary document about mortgaging this land. So this idea of an eternal inheritance suggests religion was crucial. Raymond of Toulouse, who we mentioned previously, he donated a huge amount of money to the cathedral at Le Poix, and a huge candle was burnt in front of the Virgin Mary to burn for the eternity of his life. And again, the reasons for this was, quote, for the redemption of my crimes. So again, this idea that religion was really important and a crucial factor behind going. In fact, Tancred of Houtville, who we also mentioned before, he had a biographer, someone who wrote an account of his life afterwards, and he talks about the fears which he had about eternal damnation for the crimes of being a knight, and therefore the crusade was an answer to those problems. And don't forget, Urban II's family were from a knightly family, so he would be more than aware of the fears which people had. So that's religion. Other factors as well, and also you could say for religion, the fact they were so determined to reach Jerusalem. There's no kind of splintering off, was there? There were the adversities of the whole crusade. They all had that crucial aim of getting to Jerusalem. And in fact, many of them actually returned back to Europe after they'd actually reached Jerusalem, which again might suggest this idea of a pilgrimage. You go there, but you also come back. Okay, there are other reasons been mentioned as well for why people went on the crusade. One is down to poor conditions in Europe itself and the desire possibly to have land or wealth or something of this nature. This is driven in part, evidence in favour of this is one of the versions of Pope Urban's speech. I think it's Robert of Reims, I can't remember off the top of my head, talks about how the Holy Land flows with milk and honey, which suggests it's rich and fertile, which may have been an attractive message, although the other versions of the speech don't really mention this, so you can take that as you wish. We do have evidence, though, that it was economically difficult times in Europe in this period. There was a drought in Europe before 1096. There were food shortages. There was famine as well. There was a disease going around at the time of 1095 called ergotism, Ergotism, which is a disease which is caused by people eating mouldy rye, which again suggests a very poor diet, people eating food which isn't kind of up to scratch. And again, in the Thomas Ashbridge book, he quotes a contemporary chronicler who says, I'll just find it, it was easy to persuade the Western Franks to leave their farms, for Gaul, meaning France, had been afflicted for some years, sometimes by civil war, sometimes by famine, sometimes by an excessive death rate. Finally, a plague had terrified the people to the point at which they despaired of life. So, not written by the French Tourist Board, that contemporary account suggests that life was tough, life was harsh. Now, I would suggest that most of the noblemen who went, the people we kind of mentioned by name, they probably would not have been hugely affected, I wouldn't have thought. But for the poor people and for the middling sorts, then they would have been really badly affected. So it may be a reason why so many poor people went. But of course, monks and contemporary chroniclers weren't really interested in poor people and what their thoughts were. But that might be a motive for them. In terms of acquiring land as a motive, again, it may have been a factor. As we said before, those southern Normans from Italy had been quite keen before the Crusade to attack Byzantium and seize land and take land in that area. And as we know, some of the Crusaders did kind of set up shop in the Crusader states and gain land in the Crusader states. So it may have been a motive, although many of the Crusaders actually came back poorer from the Crusade. And some of them were quite wealthy before they went, so they had no kind of financial need to go on the Crusade. People like Stephen of Blois, who we mentioned on the previous video, or, for example, who was it, Robert of Flanders as well. So a number of them were already pretty wealthy, so which would suggest that wealth and greed was not a major factor for many of them. Although for some, it may well have been. And of course, it wouldn't have been a reason written down as to go, because it's not exactly a noble kind of reason. Another reason why people went on the Crusade are these family connections. Again, the previous video I mentioned quite a few of them. The fact that Robert of Normandy took his brother-in-law, Stephen of Blois, Robert of Flanders, his cousin. We got Tancred of Hauteville, who went with his uncle, Bohemond of Taranto. So we do have quite a few kind of family connections. And of course, for most of the knights who went, they would have gone out of obligation because their lord was going. And not that that's a family connection, but it would have been a major reason why so many knights went on the Crusade. You know, if your lord is going on the Crusade, you'd be expected to follow them no matter where they were going. And so they happened to be on the Crusade, so you would go with them. So most of those 7,000 to 10,000 knights who went on the Crusade probably went because they were following their lord and serving their lord. Although, you know, religion and other factors may have been a factor in there as well. That is an important consideration to have. And the final reason, which is often put forward for why people went on the Crusade, is this younger son syndrome, i.e. the spares, to quote the modern Prince Harry. You know, they've got no real role, they've got less land than their elder brothers have, they've got no chance of inheriting, or little chance of inheriting, kind of the family estates. They had nothing to lose but go on the Crusade. And there certainly are examples of people who would fit into that model. So, you know, you've got the brother of the King of France, we mentioned before, Hugh de Vermandois. We've got people like, you know, Robert of Normandy, who missed out on being King of England. Godfrey Bouillon and his brother Baldwin of Boulogne were the younger sons of the Count of Boulogne. So again, you do have these younger sons. Although, that said, Robert of Normandy did lose out on the throne because he was actually on his way back from the Crusade when his brother died, so he would have inherited in that situation. You do have people like Stephen of Blois, who were very rich and very wealthy. They had no real reason to go, younger brothers or otherwise. And so there's been a lot of historians now discount this as being a major factor. So they are some of the reasons put forward for why people went on the Crusade. There are some fors and against in there. Notice how I've used quite a few names. I've kind of got the little quotes. I've used bits of Pope Urban's speech. Again, in an essay, that's the kind of detail that you'd need to use. For those 10 markers, that's the kind of detail that you need to use. As I said in the previous one, look at Thomas Asbridge's book, The First Crusade, chapter 2, or have a look at his big, thick red book. This one, again, a slightly shorter version of the same thing.